Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Care webinar series. It is wonderful to see people joining us from probably across different communities and sectors today. Please find a comfortable position, go ahead and eat your lunch, drink your tea, your coffee, and tune in to this conversation. My name is Kristen Kong, and I'm a health promoter at Access Alliance Multicultural Health and Community Services, where I focus on advancing newcomer mental health and wellness through the arts. One of my favorite parts of this role is doing this. Like webinars, it supports capacity building and mobilizing knowledge in ways that can meaningfully shape everyday practice and community care, which many of you already are doing. So today's a special day because this is the first of the Creative Care series. We are thrilled to launch this Creative Care webinar series, a six-part session across this month, June and July, to advance arts integration in healthcare and settlement. And I would like to share that it is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada, part of the Hubs of Expressive Arts for Life, known as the HEAL Project. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. In tune with acknowledgements, I also would like to acknowledge the land in which many of us are gathered here today. Those of us in Toronto are on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. As an organization serving immigrants and refugees facing systemic barriers, we recognize the ongoing impacts of colonization on Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit people, and we honor the resilience and resistance of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. I also want to recognize that in many Indigenous communities, communication extends beyond words, drawing on storytelling, song, ceremony, dance, visual arts, silence, and relationships with the land to convey things like knowledge and emotion and collective memory. And these forms of expression recognize that some experiences, teachings, and ways of knowings cannot be fully captured through spoken language alone. Why I'm sharing this is because it relates to today's webinar. The title is called When Words Aren't Enough: The Role of Arts in Trauma Healing for Newcomer Communities. So I want to pose the question, have you ever wondered why the arts for trauma healing? What is the evidence for expressive arts, specifically among newcomer communities and other communities made vulnerable by the system? So today you will hear a discussion, a dialogue on how arts-based approaches can support trauma recovery, healing, belonging among communities, and highlighting trauma-informed practice. And I am not going to do this alone. As you can see, I am sharing this space with three other panelists. So I'm pleased to introduce today's panelists in brief. I will allow them to share more about themselves as we explore today's questions. So I'll start off with Izumi with the red background. Izumi Sakamoto is Associate Professor at the University of Toronto's Factor Inwintosh Faculty of Social Work and Academic Fellow at the Center for Critical Qualitative Health Research. Dr. Sakamoto's work combines community-based research and arts inquiry, focusing on immigrant justice, anti-Asian racism, and Japanese-Canadian identity. So thank you for being here with us. The next in the blue background is Melissa. Melissa Fong is an art psychotherapist and program worker at the YWCA Toronto, where she supports the Breakthrough program. She facilitates expressive arts-based programming for women and gender-diverse individuals who have experienced violence at any stage of their life. She is passionate about the art-based healing and is committed to making mental health support more accessible, inclusive, and responsive across all communities. So thank you, Melissa, for being here. And finally, in our green background is Georgia Fullerton. Georgia is an award-winning visual artist and expressive arts therapist and educator based in the GTA, currently serving as the Associate Program Director at the Crate Institute. Georgia's art and therapeutic work centers on relational and cultural responsive arts programming, ancestral healing, memory, and embodied trauma-informed care for Black mothers and the broader community. So you can see we are among a lot of wisdom here today. So I'm really excited to hear the dialogue and kind of the lived experiences among this group. And so to structure our discussion, I will be inviting our panelists to respond to three guiding questions. Each panelist will have an opportunity to share their perspectives and experiences. Throughout the webinar, attendees, I encourage you to submit your questions or reflections in the Zoom Q&A feature. We will be able to see them on our end. We will hopefully have time at the end of the session to address one or two questions, and the rest we will be looking at them ourselves and responding to them in a different way. Okay, so that was a lot. I'm going to take a sip of water before we begin. All right, so let's begin with our first question. Our first question, can you describe one concrete example where expressive arts have led to measurable shifts in a participant's well-being or community's well-being and engagement? And I'm going to invite Izumi to start us off with the conversation.
Thank you, Christian. Hi, thank you for inviting me to discuss these important topics. Before answering these questions and this one in particular, I wanted to acknowledge that my work has not focused specifically on newcomer survivors of gender-based violence, although some of them have been the survivors for sure. So my perspectives come from arts-based social work, anti-oppressive practice, community-based participatory research and group work with immigrants and refugees, and research on tacit and embodied knowledge. And across these contexts, I have become interested in a common question, which is how do we support people when their experiences exceed available language? And for service providers, how do we listen to the experiences of people who may not be able to put their complex and difficult experiences in words yet or ever? So there are many outcomes of using arts in the expressive arts in a supportive way. Use of arts do not automatically lead to positive outcomes. You have to be skillful, you have to be thoughtful in planning, knowing the population, all those things. However, so looking back, belonging, a sense of belonging and sense of trust are the ones that come to my mind most when using arts in working with newcomers or people who are going through trauma. And when you are going through trauma, sense of trust is broken. You don't know who to trust, and you don't know if your experience is extreme and not to be understood by anybody. But coming together with art. And also, when you are speaking, you censor your words. You don't know if you are saying something that could be understood. But when you are invited into arts-based practice, arts-based, and I would like doing this in groups in particular because you share the experience with other people and other people can listen or understand you wholly, not just partially through words. So belonging and trust building, that could take some time, but like what we have seen in the HEAL program that Kristen coordinated so skillfully, definitely those are beautiful outcomes which I have observed. And out of that, there's also a sense of social connection, engagement. So you try out the engagement, you start trusting people again, and you feel that you could belong to somewhere. Then you can try out different ways of connecting to different groups of people or larger society a little more easily. So engagement, and you might feel a little more confident about yourself. You could try participation. You can also make meaning out of your difficult experience because often trauma have you not understand what really happened, but gaining understanding through arts may lead to gaining words and language to describe it as well. So that all of that includes critical awareness, critical consciousness of where you are, and then that could also lead to willingness to seek support because you're not the person who just went, you know, you are the like exception, nobody understood you to, oh, this is the structure issue. This happened to many other people. And these people could be helpful to me. So then that can start making sense. And all of this can strengthen relationship as well. And just lastly to this question, I would like to bring in Regine King, who unfortunately passed away just last week. She was the professor in University of Calgary, just 58 years old. She's a survivor of Rwandan genocide. And she really put her life into recovery, healing of individuals and communities. And it was her belief that healing doesn't happen alone. So, aptly named one of her articles was the true healing is healing together. And she used storytelling to do this work. And I think storytelling in the cultural setting, in a very cultural setting, is part of our artistic practice. And I think that this is one prime example of use of arts in trauma settings. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. And thank you for bringing the individual to the collective, that healing happens in community. And yeah, and that sense of trust and belonging and all of those things trickle into other parts of our lives. So I'm going to pass it now to Melissa to respond to that question.
Mhm. Thank you. And so at Breakthrough, a lot of our participants who come into our program are experiencing isolation, loneliness. And so they come to us to connect with other people, to build that sense of community, to create space for themselves at the same time. And so an example of where the expressive arts has led to a measurable shift in a participant's well-being. I think in a general sense, we can see it through consistent attendance, very low dropout rates. The clients come and they want the program to extend beyond what we offer. And so through our post-group feedback and evaluations, we're able to extract statements from clients who share that the arts has been such an integral part of their healing. In particular, our group and using expressive arts has been the only form of therapy that they found to be helpful for their certain circumstance. And I think the impacts can be felt far beyond our group as well. And so we often find that people who come to our group and our participants then go on to reach out and connect to other resources and find other services that could help them. So, for instance, people who come to our group then go on to join creative writing groups or other forms of art therapy groups. And so we see that happening where that impact sort of ripples across the field, which is great to see. And again, so I think qualitatively speaking, we can observe group members while they're in a group. We see how they start from a very isolated place. They might not want to share or engage, but over time, over the course of the weeks, we can see how their willingness to share and reflect and participate, engage in the group continues to grow over time.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you for touching upon that beyond and time, that actually it's very long, after that participants will continue using the arts and, that idea of sustainability after a program ends. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to pass it now to Georgia.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for having me here. Um, and I guess I'm going to go a little bit adjacent to what everyone else is doing, but much like Izumi, I have more experience with communities who are not experiencing gender-based violence. However, it's part of my creative pathway how I got involved in the expressive arts, having been a survivor of intimate partner abuse, which is probably the most prevalent form of gender-based violence. And so I'm going to speak a little bit based on this question about my experience. And I'm not a newcomer. I've lived in this country for many years, but as I said, I survived intimate partner abuse, and I think it was because of my existing connection with the arts originally as an artist that helped save me in this situation. And what ended up happening was really starting to change how I looked at art making, and really tried to change my relationship with art making, and realized that it was helping to heal me. And so I questioned, how can this continue to heal me and heal others? It so happened that I attended a workshop for women artists who were wanting to ditch their 9 to 5 and move into art making full time. This was with Trey Anthony, if anyone knows who that is. And it really sparked my interest, and it turned out to be a very organic, multimodal workshop where we had spoken word artists, comedians, jewelry makers, singers, and one of the individuals had studied the 3-year program at the Create Institute, and I got curious about it. I then went into that, and long story short, the outcome that took place after studying expressive arts therapy and being involved in that turned out to be a history-making art exhibition for myself and the work that I was doing, while I was in isolation, sort of healing from my experience. So I look at some of the ways that indicators show up, or did show up in my instance. And isolation may not sound like an indicator towards healing, but it actually did work out that way for me. Being surrounded by paints, canvases, brushes, and painting my way back into a new way of looking at my life and the art making. But as far as therapeutic and even psychological indicators, there was a lot of self-regulation that I learned on my own, but in connecting with the community who's involved in the expressive arts, that helped with everything else, like the emotional processing that I experienced, and even behaviorally, I was able to engage with others who maybe not had experienced the violence that I had, but they had a vested interest in art making and how it could help them express themselves more fluidly. So, of course, other indicators are developmental. And one of the main things that happened for me was seeking therapeutic help, and always being a lifelong learner and looking to education as a way to help my situation and elevate me. I was determined not to hide away for too long. And in that regard, I ended up studying at the Create Institute, and my artwork changed. So as a practicing visual artist, I typically would paint portraiture or figurative work, and understanding what happens in the in-between stage and the trusting the process stage of expressive arts, my style changed to abstract expressionist. And so that allowed me to explore all kinds of materials and just the way in which I communicated with myself and others. And of course, the outcome is multifaceted, because not only was I working in community and primarily working with Black mothers, some who had experienced GBV and some who were just residents of Canada and were going through their own journey. And it allowed me to be a lot more thoughtful around how I introduce the arts with others. And I know we're going to talk more about choosing the right modality, etc., later on. But again, it's now a full circle moment where I sit as the associate program director for the institute that I studied this work. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Georgia. And thank you for being so vulnerable to share your own personal story. And I think that's so powerful because often as practitioners, we have also engaged and experienced that transformational power of the arts. And I love kind of that evolution that you took us through and, something that you said, painting a way back in. That is so true. And that segue, a lot of people often ask, which art do I choose? Because we know that expressive arts is so expansive and it actually includes all of the arts. And so the second question I want to pose is, yeah, what types of expressive arts modalities or approaches have shown the strongest impact, with the communities that we've worked in? And you can talk about, maybe some of those outcomes, but that is a very hot topic question that often people ask. So I'm going to send that first to Melissa.
Thank you. And so the way that I sort of approach this question and when I think of what modality is best, for me, I think there's not a single expressive arts modality that's like a one size fits all. How clients respond to the different modalities that we offer in group does depend on the trauma that they've experienced in terms of newcomers, perhaps their cultural backgrounds. Maybe language is a barrier for them, and so there are certain things that might work better than others. But in this case, we leave it up to the client to determine that. So at Breakthrough in particular, we do offer, and I know Georgia touched on this multimodal structure to offering healing. And so we offer a range of modalities. It includes visual arts, music, movement, storytelling, so creative writing, journaling, and each one offers something different. And so I think the visual arts, music, movement, those are things that transcend language. So if there is a language barrier, those activities, those prompts make it much more accessible for everyone to be able to participate. They all contribute to a sense of emotional regulation. In terms of the visual arts specifically, it's a way for people to communicate, as you say, when words aren't enough, no matter what your background is or where you're coming from or what level of art experience that you have. Visual arts is a way to be able to process that trauma and communicate that through a nonverbal sort of lens. We can extract meaning and create symbols that are particularly meaningful for the person who created the artwork. In terms of music, we often incorporate music into our group that helps to reduce things like stress and anxiety. It helps, again, reinforce that sense of community because we're all creating music together. Movement, it, again, helps us to reconnect to our bodies, helps rid ourselves of that excess sort of energy. And I think when we can reach a level where we feel comfortable in our own bodies, that in turn increases that sense of safety. And so when it comes to storytelling or journaling, when we offer journal prompts in our groups as a way for our group members to reflect on what they've created, and sort of make meaning of their experiences. Again, I think that gives them perhaps a stronger sense of identity, taking more control of that narrative as well. And so again, all of these help with that emotional regulation. And so it is difficult to sort of choose just one that would be best. I think this multimodal approach to healing is quite beneficial for participants to engage with because it allows for that flexibility to be able to discover what might work best for them and what might not. And so those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you for giving us kind of an array of what types of art modalities there are out there. And I agree. I think, humans are complex. We are very interdisciplinary ourselves. And so I think the arts meets, us at those different points with those different modalities. I'm going to pass this on to Georgia next to respond. Mhm.
My turn already. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Melissa, I just love the bringing back of what happens in the breakthrough program because that was one of my primary practicums, and that is where I got my first experience working with women who had experienced violence. And one of the things that I really move towards that brings strength in the modalities that I use was we did a wearable art program. The whole practicum was about wearable art and movement, and I found that hugely impactful for there are women, people who cannot lift their arms because of fear of not feeling safe and or comfortable, and so working with different stages of wearable art, different materials that we used, and all along the way telling their story and sharing their story. I found that that was really impactful to marry those two things, the speaking on what had happened and using the wearable art to express and show what it felt like to wear what they were carrying. So that's really big. And I think also because Melissa sort of covered all the modalities in expressive arts, I could speak specifically on directives that I had used in the past and I've used, continue to use. Ritual and prayer, depending on the cultural group that you're working with, hugely important. And that sense of familiarity and being at home in that place of ritual or prayer is something that I've noticed is really helpful for just regulation, nervous system. Also, something as simple as being able to access skin tone crayons. This is a simple thing, but it's hugely meaningful and can be really triggering if there's not what you want from the collection of colors. Also, an activity that is very meditative or it brings about a greater ability to practice mindfulness is braiding. In the Black community with the Black moms that I work with, braiding or anything that is treatment of hair, working with fabric is very self-regulating. They're able to unpack their story through image as well as role play. We talk about not just idioms, but mannerisms that we bring about in a difficult childhood or a difficult motherhood experience, and what does that sound like? Kissing your teeth or things like that. We really explore all of those mannerisms. So I think outcomes differ, sometimes based on which modality you use and in what order. Because it's intermodal, we'll go from one to the next. So for example, if someone is really having a problem settling down emotionally or they become very emotional, I might not ask them to use watercolor. Watercolor is a very unforgiving medium. So if you look at, watercolor versus clay, where clay is very grounded, you feel stable, you feel solid. So there's this sort of play of unforgiving versus groundedness, and being intentional about what you choose. Even though you give all the choices, as Melissa spoke about, again, sometimes the practitioner does have to direct what is the best material to use. So I hope that is following and speaking on some of the stronger modalities that I've used in the past.
Yes, thank you, Georgia. And thank you for those very concrete examples of cultural tailoring, because that is so important when we work with very diverse, communities. And I really loved what you also talked about, embodiment, right? The embodiment of certain art modalities, enactment. And when I first started to learn about expressive arts, one of my favorite things was the idea of imagination that, art brings out a different reality than the one that we're living. And I think all of us, are talking to that. And to Izumi's point, I'm going to pass it to Izumi in just 1 second, but the skillfulness of facilitators to know which modality speaks to that person in that moment, what are they needing? So I'm going to pass it now to Izumi.
Thank you, Kristen. So as Melissa and Georgia alluded to, I don't think that there's one modality that is universally best to survivors of trauma, LGBT. And rather than, so we need to ask, what kind of knowing, expression, connection, or healing are we hoping to support? And what are, as service providers, what kind of capacity do you have? Do you, so then those are the kinds of things I will ask. And different art forms create different pathways. For me, in my work, I worked with professional artists who understood the expansive nature and possibilities of arts as well as limitations. So then they helped us create containers. It's really important to also think about how far do we want to take people to? Because people are used to talking about their own experiences or not to talk about it. But when using art, that could just take off, to you take you to the places where you're not ready to explore. So really important to know what kind of contents you are providing with the use of arts. So for that, and I worked with Natalie Wood from who used to work at Sistering and Inspiration Studio, and now at George Brown College as a professor. And when working with cis and trans women who have experienced homelessness, and it was important that when we gather a group of people, this was in arts research context, that people may only come once. So let's just do one time, one shot thing. And then, so like up to 3 hours, people show up and we explain and get the consent form signed and explain what we're going to do. And people engage and get to the point of completing something together. And they evaluate or reflect on things in the end with the sustained group of advisors who have also experienced homelessness firsthand. And they were a sustained group of people that worked with us. But Natalie helped us choose the modality of stage photography, which is to use the photography and the images and costumes and acting to capture the moments of their experiences. And that also expanded to vision, that hope that they would like to have in the future. So, but the containing the activity and building the activity was so skillfully done by Natalie, knowing the population really well as the modality, as an artist themselves. Also, we need to think about access to language. Do we and access to dominant cultural norms? Are we coming from the dominant cultural norms, imposing our understanding of how to speak, how to express, and so forth? So, allowing space to express themselves in different ways was something that was important as well. And I used also theater with newcomers in the project of immigrant employment and the Canadian experience barrier. And so using theater of the oppressed and drama therapy informed activities, we were able to solicit different ways that people experienced discrimination and trauma in exploring, in trying to obtain employment. And this work was done with Jessica Bloor, who's a drama therapist and theater specialist trained by Auguste Dubois, who created the work of Theater of the Oppressed, and she's now at the Concordia University. So, and that allowed us to explore their experiences of Canadian experience and the trauma associated with it, with different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and shed lights on invisible barriers or tacit knowledge and collective reflection that come out of it. Lastly, I was a music therapist in Japan and worked with different populations, including people who have been institutionalized following the leprosy diagnosis. And back then, as still now, people are highly stigmatized, erased from family registry, which exists in Japan. So you change your name so that you won't. The rest of the family will not be affected by your existence. It's a lonely existence, isolated. It shouldn't be like that because treatment to leprosy exists for decades, but social isolation still exists. Anyway, music therapy was something that I was part of the group, and fighting against trauma, stigma, discrimination, and including the experience of gender-based violence that people have sustained. And music therapy was constructed in a way differential participation was optimally allowed. So you could just stay in your room listening from your room, lying down, to coming out to the rec room and be in the back, or that listening passively or actively playing the instruments or singing together or leading the singing together. Different ways existed to participate, and that freedom was very important that people had access to. And definitely, I saw one person starting from rejecting, refusing to participate, to slowly coming closer to the center in the front of the room. And at the end, singing and laughing in front of the room. So I saw that differently. Sense of belonging, feeling that you understood and you could be part of a big whole. And you don't have to explain your experience, and because everybody shared the experience. So those are also beautiful experiences I have had.
Thank you. Thank you, Izumi, for providing also different contexts, different contexts of different communities. Before I move on actually to the last question, I'm going to just pause here to see if anyone wants to respond to what has been shared. And for those who are attending, if you want to take a couple of minutes to post a reflection or question in the Q&A, feel free to do that right now as we just allow a moment of response from the other panelists if you want to. Mhm.
I'm gonna say that Georgia, so skin tone crayons, those are extremely important. And I would share, so how do you make the activities as inclusive as possible? Your imagination may be limited by your life experience and your perspective. So, for example, when we worked with people who have experienced homelessness, the stage photography, over 200 articles of clothes and accessories are donated by one of the volunteers. They're beautiful. People love them, but we didn't have extra large sizings. So that was exclusive. And only when one of the advisory board members pointed that out, I'm like, oh, shoot. So then we went and looking for things that are different sizes. So that was oops on our part, but that could make people feel excluded in a place where you are trying to make inclusive space. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Izumi. There's many things that fly under the radar. We don't realize that they fall under the umbrella of inclusivity. And so that's good to hear that you have that awareness too. I just like what everyone is saying so far. I'm learning things also, about capacity. Um, there's a lot to be said about what gets transferred while you are leading a group or an individual, and so that's something that I would always talk to other practitioners about, and be mindful of it for myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to move us along to our final question. And our final question, we did touch upon it in the beginning, which is, what are specific outcomes from using the arts in trauma recovery? And, attached to that is how do we even measure, trauma recovery using the arts? So I'm going to pass that to Georgia to start us off with this final question.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. This is a really good question, I think, because it's the thing that everyone is looking towards, the evidence of the arts and what does it do. I was saying before we started that what many folks don't realize is that in this age, everything that we're using is arts based. You go from social media straight through. We are focused on imagery, we are focused on sound, and those are not new things. They are very old practices that have been around forever. I think, you know, I think for me, what I noticed with, I'll speak to the Black mothers that I work with. Some of them have experienced gender-based violence, and some have not. As I said before, one of the things that really floated to the top after every single session was that there was a collective appreciation for one another's story, and bringing up issues of racism and the Black experience, and even bringing in their children and what their children experience, and how well are they equipped to help their family overcome, or just try to work with what the system is feeding them, and there was a lot of I'll call it camaraderie, but sisterhood, really, with these grouping of women. They learned to extract what was valuable within themselves, and as a group. So there was a lot of resource exchanging and help, who to talk to at the school and things like that. But generally, I would say, well, it's not general, it's specific. It's specific to this group. But there was confidence to explore, what is hidden or painful. And they explored that in using different modalities. I tried to work in almost a decolonized way with this group of women, and we often move towards DBT or CBT. Sometimes using your language has to be filtered also when you're bringing in these other evidence-based. But it's not that I don't use them. I tend to integrate things like parts work, internal family systems work, because it's a really great way to talk about what these mothers wanted to talk about a lot was relationship dynamics with the partners they've chosen in the past, and how we can kind of flush out and unpack what went wrong, what worked, what was a surprise. But I'll tell you one of the outcomes that took place. I think I wrote it down here. One of the mothers was also part of a trauma-informed group, small group. And when she came back to the art therapy session, she said, well, I've convinced them that they need to do more harvesting. They need to share more at the end, as well as maybe integrate some art-based activity within the trauma group. So I was seeing those outcomes as something positive for the field of expressive arts therapy, and it allowed them to take what they had learned and share it with others. Yeah, so as I said, it brought them together as a collective group, and another end result was that this has been a 3 round session of programming, and that was a really good outcome. This is a program funded by the City of Toronto, but held in the early on centers. And so these sessions prompted 3 more rounds of programming, and the women found that they were assertive enough to start a studio practice, to start an art practice of their own. So those are just some of the things. In addition, I'll say overall, I noticed less self-judgment because that just came at me big time when I started, and just more willing to explore witnessing themselves and being witnessed, without language. So all of that came into play. They're empowered also by tools that are calming. It could be just a butterfly hug. It could be anything that's braiding hair. But all of these cultural traditions also came into play. And yeah, that's where I'll start and stop.
Thank
Talking
you.
about time.
Thank you. And thank you for those observations because, some of those observations, again, may not be, able to quantify. We can't quantify necessarily these outcomes, but as facilitators, we observe them, through time. So I'm going to pass it on to Melissa.
You. Yeah, and just to speak on that point, it is the way that we sort of gather our data is through these post-group evaluations, anonymous feedback forms, but a lot of it is dependent on facilitator observations of what's going on in the group. Again, what are the subtle cues that we can pick up on? What is the client's general demeanor in a group? How are they responding to the different invitations? And then adapting accordingly. I think if we go back to what the definition of art therapy or expressive arts therapy is, it's yes, a tool that we can use in place of words or as a way to communicate. But it's also about being able to be consistently and constantly adapting our methods and the theories and the different art applications and techniques to suit the different circumstances or the different needs of clients as well. And so that's some of the ways that we gather data is just through these evaluations and feedback forms. Um, and yeah, I think over time we've seen that, and we've been given feedback that the arts has helped the client engage and connect with themselves, and in turn have helped them engage and connect with others around them. It's improved relationships around them. We make it a point in group to really give choice to all of our group members and to make sure that they feel like they have the autonomy to make the choices that are best for them. And yeah, I think it's just been such a valuable tool to be able to employ, and people really respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And thank you for noting, those feedback surveys and really integrating that in your program, that it's not an afterthought, but actually harvesting, like Georgia's saying, harvesting is so important to building evidence, but also for us to know what works and what doesn't work, right? So I'll pass it off to Izumi for the final, lasting comments for this question. And then we do have a question from the audience, so we'll get to that. Okay, go ahead, Izumi.
Thank you. Oh, very thoughtful answers from our panelists, Melissa and Georgia, already. And I would say the HEAL project that Christine coordinates is very cutting edge in this regard. And it's supported by Public Health Canada, pre and post surveys, evaluations, interviews, observations. And these are embedded in the program itself. and not only individual assessments, but also so that's micro, but also meso and macro ways of impacts have been explored, examined. So I said hats off to you, Christian, and the team for having done that. And having said that, and also this is long-term impact is also something you are looking to in the HEAL project too, like 3 months, 6 months later, and so forth. And that is really difficult to measure or assess in the traditional ways, because usually when you do the program, you might do pre and post surveys or questionnaire evaluations, but then people are off. And you might do, a little bit of follow-up, but you don't know what happens 1, 3, 5, 10 years later. And if you are doing really impactful work, the experience of expressive arts sessions could remain in you and change things over time too, which is immeasurable. Also, when we talk about evidence, we tend to think about numbers. So did your self-esteem increase? And how confident do you feel? Do you feel less depressed? And those are really important measures as well. However, there are, like other panelists mentioned, there are other ways that people express the impact of the expressive arts sessions. And so that is important to capture. So both quantitative and qualitative research methods should be considered as well. And there are different kinds of evidence that's accumulating slowly but surely. And often it's not targeting newcomers who are survivors of gender-based violence per se, but for example, I think, Christine, you're aware of this, but WHO has a 2022 report, Arts and Health, Supporting the Mental Well-being of Forcibly Displaced People. So they break down by activity type, like music, literature and writing, theater and dance, and visual and participatory arts, and psychological, social, and behavioral. So they are looking at different impacts of these activities on the well-being of individuals. And also another thing I would like to say is that is recovery defined only as symptom reductions like depression, anxiety, which are really important. Of course, you may be immobilized, may not be able to, work, or you get out of the house. And so those are very important, but also other forms of change are important to capture too. So increased participation, sustained engagement, social connection, willingness to return to work or gatherings, confidence in sharing, strengthening social networks. And most important is underlining all this is new meaning making. I am a bad person, or I am no good. All that negative messages that you might have received so many years or so long could be rewritten through participating in expressive arts sessions with right modality and skillful construction by the social service providers. So then that new meaning making of yourself and your stories, your experiences could lead to increased sense of agency. And then you could also feel a sense of belonging. So these can be assessed with storytelling or the product of the art itself, and how that might have shifted over time. So documenting these different modalities, different ways that people are expressing themselves is so important. The use of art allows for different expressions, different stories to be told. So then I think it's upon us to explore different ways of evaluating, not just in quantitative surveys, for example, which again is very important, but also expanding ways of measure or assess the impact of such activities. And I would also argue that critical consciousness is an outcome. So, like popular education, like Paulo Freire, and I mentioned Auguste Boal, following Paulo Freire's work, and then he started Theater of the Oppressed. These are all based on popular education people who didn't have access to education because of oppression, didn't have access to language because of oppression, start having access and start to understand why this is happening, why difficult realities are happening because of this bigger structural issues. So that raising of critical consciousness can give you a perspective to your own experience, then you don't feel alone. So having that critical consciousness and also using art can put a little bit of distance from your experience and your expression, and for you to be able to see it a little more objectively or with the distance. Then that can give you a different meaning of your experience as well. Again, all of this can be critical consciousness raising that can be achieved through expressive arts. And and also, this is all done with the idea of anti-oppressive practice and for what to what end. It's not just it's great to have recreation. Yes, that's also great. But I think what HEAL project is trying to do is something like moving to somewhere that people can see themselves a little differently, make different meanings and connect with each other and create a sense of belonging and sort of move to a different place in their own lives. So that's also very important, and that's underlined with anti-oppressive thoughts and practice.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Izumi. That is many things in that. But yeah, I love your point about the longevity that sometimes we don't see outcomes until years later, which speaks to trauma healing is a lifelong journey, right? So just really quickly, I know we have only 2 minutes left, so I want to get to this really great question and comment by one of our attendees. And they said, "Thank you all for sharing. So inspiring. For practitioners and researchers who want to integrate art in our practices and projects, any suggestions on where to start?" And the second part here is, and how to find comfort and confidence in facilitating an art space. So, with our time, I'm wondering if we can actually get the panelists to answer this question, the last question, how to find comfort and confidence in facilitating an art space in 2 sentences. Let's challenge ourselves, okay?
Ah, that is
Georgia, I'll send it to you because you unmuted. Go
That's a
for
challenge. That is a challenge. But I will say this much. You have to experience the process personally, right? So you can build your own empathy and confidence as a facilitator if you get your hands into the material and begin to explore it, right? Maintaining yourself as a curious guide, and maybe just try it out in a small group that you're comfortable with, maybe just one activity at a time. I guess I'll leave it there. There's probably more I could say, but I want to give others space.
it. Thank you. Great. Passing it to Melissa.
Yeah, I think my suggestion would be to start small. I know we've been talking a lot about these multimodal structures, but start with one thing and take it from there. So just touching on what Georgia mentioned at the end there, just to start small, take it small, one step at a time.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And one sentence from you, Izumi.
Um, you don't have to do it alone. You can work with other people.
That's right. That's right. All right. So thank you. So that is a wrap. So I am so grateful for each and every one of you that attended, but also shared today. And this is really a spark of conversation. I hope that this webinar goes beyond, this 1 hour into other types of dialogue. I also want to say that, follow us on Access Alliance social media. We have upcoming webinars every single week until July, so you can join that. And our next one is next Thursday, June 25th from 12 to 1. So we hope to see you there. And thank you, Marco. Marco has put our Access Alliance Arts website for family health, so you can learn more there. But that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for being here, and we will see you next week.
Uh,
Thank you. Bye.
Have such a good day, everyone.
Have a good one.